"She's just a pathetic single mom," my sister's groom mocked into the microphone. And my mother, standing right by the head table, laughed so loud her crystal champagne glass actually shook. 250 wealthy guests immediately followed her lead. The bright chandeliers caught every cruel smile, every tilted glass, every single person who thought my painful life was just the punchline to someone else's wedding toast. I sat silently at table 14, the hidden back table they stick you at when they secretly wish you hadn't even shown up, and I didn't move an inch. My hands stayed completely flat on the white linen, my breathing stayed perfectly even. But sitting right next to me, my 11-year-old son's jaw was locked so tight it looked like solid concrete. What absolutely none of them knew, not my cruel mother, not Damien, not a single laughing person in that massive ballroom, was that my brave boy had been carrying a devastating secret for 3 long weeks, and he was about to stand up and share it with every last one of them. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I always love knowing where you're listening from. I'm Felicity. I'm 35, and this is the story of my sister's wedding, the one that never actually happened. Let me take you back 8 months to the phone call that changed my entire life. It came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. The sky outside my window was a bruised, heavy purple. I was sitting at my second-hand desk, halfway through a logo redesign for a local brewery, when my little sister's name lit up my screen. Brianna. My hand hovered over the phone. We talked maybe once a month, and even then it was just polite, hollow chatter. "Just pick it up, Felicity," I told myself. "I'm engaged," she shrieked before I could even say hello. "Congratulations," I breathed, and I truly meant it. Despite the quiet distance that had grown between us over the years, I desperately wanted her to be happy. "His name is Damien Miller. He's in real estate development. Mom already loves him," she rambled, her voice overflowing with pure joy. Then, she paused. The energy shifted, growing tight. "Mom says you have to come to the engagement dinner. No excuses this time. Not I want you there. Not it would mean the world to me. Just Mom says you have to come." That was my family in a nutshell. My mother, Janet Harrison, had spent 25 years mastering the cruel art of comparison. Brianna was the golden child, the beautiful daughter with the fancy event coordinator job at a luxury hotel. I was the cautionary tale, the daughter who got divorced at 27, moved into a tiny 2-bedroom apartment in Holyoke, and built a freelance graphic design business from scratch. My apartment walls were covered in artwork I had proudly created for clients across the state. Clean, precise, successful. Janet had never once asked to see a single piece of it. Later that night, after tucking my 11-year-old son Evan into bed, I opened our family group chat. Brianna had sent a photo of her hand. A massive glittering diamond ring dominated the screen. It was the kind of jewelry that screamed for attention before the woman wearing it could even speak. But it was my mother's reply at the very bottom that stole the air from my lungs. Finally, one of my daughters did something right. I stared at the glowing screen in the dark. One of my daughters, the words physically stung, like a sudden slap to the face. I read it twice, letting the familiar ache wash over me, then closed the app. I went back to my computer and stared at the unfinished brewery logo. Some messages don't deserve a response. They just need to be filed away to protect your heart. I met Damien Miller a week later at my mother's house. It was a massive, perfectly decorated home she had bought with her divorce settlement. Walking inside always felt like entering a museum. Cold marble floors, fresh flowers on every spotless table, and an expensive candle burning in the corner just to give the empty rooms a signature scent. Damien arrived 15 minutes late. He wore a crisp designer coat, perfectly tailored pants, and shoes that shined like glass. He shook my hand firmly, holding eye contact just a second too long. It felt deeply practiced, rehearsed. He's acting, I realized instantly. The way he scanned the room gave him away. He didn't look at us with warmth. He looked at the expensive paintings, the velvet furniture, the sheer size of the house. He was calculating the price tag of my mother's life. He went straight for Janet. "Mrs. Harrison, this house has more character than half the $1 million listings I've sold this year," he praised smoothly. He pointed to a painting above the fireplace. "Is that an original? The lighting is absolutely extraordinary." My mother practically melted. She touched his arm, glowing with pride, and launched into a long story about how she bought it. I watched Damien nod at exactly the right moments, mirroring her posture perfectly. He played her like a master musician playing a violin. When he finally turned to me, his fake warmth vanished. The temperature in his eyes dropped to freezing. "Felicity, Great to finally meet you." He offered a limp handshake and immediately dropped my hand. When my sweet son stepped forward and politely said, "Nice to meet you, sir," Damien barely reacted. He gave Evan a stiff, silent nod. No handshake, no smile, and immediately turned his back on my child. I pulled Evan a little closer to my side. Brianna, however, noticed nothing. She held onto Damien's arm, glowing with absolute, unquestioning love. She looked at him like he was the answer to every prayer she had ever whispered. But as I watched his cold, calculating eyes scan my mother's wealth one more time, a terrible, icy dread twisted in my stomach. Damien Miller wasn't here for my sister's heart. He was hunting for something else. During the agonizingly slow dinner, the clinking of expensive crystal and silver forks filled the silence. I sat across from the golden couple, trying to chew my food. That was when I saw it. Damien casually slipped his hand under the heavy tablecloth. The faint blue glow of his phone screen lit up his lap. A text notification flashed brightly. A name, V, followed by a single red heart emoji. He swiped it away in a fraction of a second, his charming smile never leaving his face. "It's probably nothing," I lied to myself, swallowing a dry piece of chicken. "A vendor, a friend. Don't ruin this." On the quiet drive home, the dark Massachusetts highway stretched out before us. The only sound was the hum of our 2020 Honda Civic. Evan sat in the passenger seat, staring blankly at the passing headlights. He was quiet for the first 15 minutes. That was highly unusual. My boy was an 11-year-old who usually had a million opinions on everything from comic books to bridge engineering. Silence meant his sharp little brain was processing something heavy. "Mom," he finally spoke, his voice small against the glass window. "Why doesn't Grandma ever ask about your work?" My grip on the steering wheel tightened. "She has a lot going on, buddy." She asked Damien about his job 3 times, Evan pressed, refusing to let it go. "She didn't ask you once." I couldn't give him an answer that made sense. How could I explain that my mother had simply never forgiven me for my divorce? That wasn't a burden an 11-year-old should carry. My ex-husband Trevor and I had split when Evan was only 5. Trevor had been secretly sleeping with a coworker for 8 long months. I discovered the truth through a random credit card statement, a weekend hotel charge in Milford while he was supposedly at a work conference. It was a clean, simple, undeniable betrayal. I filed the papers. He signed them. He moved states away, and eventually stopped calling altogether. My mother's terrible response back then still echoed in my ears. "You pushed him away, Felicity. Men like Trevor don't just leave." I finally stopped trying to earn my mother's impossible approval the year I turned 31. Some emotional debts just aren't worth collecting. Instead, I rebuilt my world from the ashes. I secured loyal clients who paid my bills. Evan was healthy, curious, and earning top grades. Our apartment was tiny, but every single lamp, picture frame, and square foot was ours. Nothing fancy, but completely paid for. Safe. As I pulled our car into the parking lot, Evan looked over at me in the dim light. "I don't trust him, Mom." I almost let out a tired laugh. "Damien? Why? Because he smiles too much? That's not a crime, Ev." "No," my son replied, his young face dead serious. "But it's a tell. 5 months before the wedding, a miracle seemed to happen. Brianna actually called to offer me a real spot in her life. "I want you to be a bridesmaid," she announced. For one brief, beautiful moment, a tight knot in my chest cracked open. She wants me. That warm feeling lasted exactly 24 hours. The next morning, my phone rang again. It was Janet. "I've spoken with Brianna," my mother stated, her tone dripping with ice. "We've decided the bridal party needs a certain cohesion. You'll do a reading during the ceremony instead. A tasteful poem. Don't make this difficult, Felicity." Cohesion. That was her polite word for it. What she actually meant was that the bridesmaids would be heavily photographed, and the divorced, struggling sister simply didn't fit the picture-perfect frame. Just like that, I was kicked out of the bridal party. No dress fitting, no shower invite, just a pathetic poem and a seat at whatever back table they decided to hide me at. I didn't argue. Fighting with Janet was like yelling at a hurricane. Exhausting, loud, and completely pointless. I accepted my defeat silently, totally unaware that the real storm hadn't even started yet, and the first warning siren was about to ring in the form of a $95,000 check. What finally caught my full attention was the wedding venue. Damien had confidently selected the Linwood Estate, an exclusive, breathtaking property just outside Lexington. It boasted rolling green lawns, perfectly carved stone terraces, and a massive, glittering ballroom that could easily hold 250 guests. The initial deposit alone was a staggering $95,000. Here is where the first visible crack in his perfect mask appeared. Janet was the one writing the checks, casually transferring that massive fortune straight from her personal bank account. However, Damien had aggressively insisted on signing the actual venue contract himself, acting as the sole responsible party on paper. "I am the head of this household now, Janet," he declared smoothly over a cup of dark espresso. "A man takes care of these legalities. It's simply a matter of pride." My mother absolutely loved that line. She ate the charming lie right out of his open hand, practically swooning at his old-school chivalry. Nobody else dared to question the bizarre arrangement. A few evenings later, I accidentally overheard Brianna pacing in the hallway, talking on her cell phone. "Damien says a prenup would ruin the sacred trust between us," she murmured, her voice sounding strangely programmed. "He says if I really love him, I wouldn't need a safety net." I stood frozen in the shadows of my mother's giant house, feeling every single alarm bell in my body fire off at once. The very same man who aggressively demanded to handle the venue contract was now flatly refusing to let anyone look at his own financial history. I had to try at least once, just one honest conversation. That was all I asked for. I managed to catch Brianna alone at a quiet, sunlit cafe in Somerville. Neutral ground, no Janet whispering in her ear, no Damien hovering over her shoulder. I kept my tone incredibly gentle and simple. "Have you looked into Damien's finances, Bri?" I asked softly, reaching across the small wooden table. "A prenup isn't a lack of trust. It actually protects both of you." Brianna's beautiful face went completely rigid before I even finished the sentence. Her eyes hardened into dark stones. "You're jealous," she hissed. She spat the words out like poison she had been holding in her mouth for weeks, just waiting for the right moment. "You couldn't keep a husband, so you don't want me to have one either." "Brianna, please, that's not." "Save it, Felicity. I know exactly what this is." She stood up abruptly, leaving her expensive vanilla latte completely untouched on the table, and stormed out the door. I sat there alone for 15 long minutes, sadly staring at the white foam dissolving into nothingness. Later that exact night, Janet called me. Her voice possessed the terrifying, surgical calm she always used when she wanted to cut someone deeply without leaving a visible mark. "Brianna told me what you said," my mother stated coldly. "Listen to me closely. If you sabotage this wedding, Felicity, you are not welcome in this family anymore. No Thanksgiving dinners, no Christmas mornings, nothing." She paused, letting the heavy threat sink into my bones. "Do you understand me? I will not let you ruin this because you are bitter about your own miserable choices." She hung up before I could reply. I sat alone in my living room, my small, clean, totally paid-for sanctuary. I looked at the 2 glowing computer monitors on my sturdy desk, displaying my hard-earned client work. My walls were covered in brilliant designs I was deeply proud of, the quiet, undeniable proof of a beautiful life I had carefully built from the ugly wreckage of my past. Then, I picked up my phone and dialed Rebecca Whitaker. "Ree," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "If I wanted to look into someone's background, hypothetically, how exactly would I do that?" Rebecca, sharp as a tack, didn't miss a single beat. "Hypothetically, you'd call your best friend who just happens to be a ruthless family attorney. Which you just did." 3 stressful months before the wedding, we endured a painfully stiff family brunch at the Maple Run Country Club. It was the kind of stuffy, expensive place where the white tablecloths were starched so hard they could stand up on their own, and the orange mimosas cost $22 a glass. Damien was in peak obnoxious form that bright morning. He had just finished bragging about closing a massive real estate deal in Wellesley when he suddenly turned his attention to me. He flashed a brilliant smile that was all bright teeth and absolutely zero warmth. "So Felicity," he drawled smoothly, loud enough for the next table to hear, "still doing that little art thing from home? That must be." He tilted his perfectly styled head, his eyes mocking me. "Cozy." Before I could even open my mouth to defend my successful business, Janet let out a high, artificial laugh. "Damien, don't be mean. She's doing her absolute best. Not everyone is cut out for the real competitive world." Brianna just looked down at her lap. She always looked down at her phone when the bullying started. But Damien wasn't quite finished marking his territory. He pivoted to Evan, who was quietly eating a plate of syrupy French toast. Damien dropped his voice into that exaggerated, fake-friendly tone adults foolishly use with toddlers. "And this must be the man of the house, huh?" he mocked. Evan calmly set down his silver fork. He didn't flinch. "I'm 11 years old, sir." His voice was totally flat, maintaining intense, unblinking direct eye contact. Damien blinked once, visibly caught off guard by the sheer gravity of a child. He awkwardly laughed it off and quickly turned back to his Wellesley story, clearly rattled. He thought he had completely won the psychological game at that table, totally unaware that in just 20 minutes he would make a careless, devastating mistake that would give my 11-year-old son the ultimate weapon. 20 minutes after the awkward French toast incident, Damien casually excused himself to the restroom. In a rare moment of careless arrogance, he left his expensive smartphone face up on the white linen tablecloth. Almost instantly, the device buzzed. Then, it vibrated again. The digital lock screen lit up, bright and undeniable, completely visible to anyone sitting within a few feet. "V, miss you. When are you coming to the city?" I was seated across the wide table, totally oblivious to the glowing screen. But my son was right there. Evan sat just one chair away. I watched him casually glance over, his sharp eyes absorbing every single word before the display faded to black. He didn't gasp. He didn't point. He simply picked up his silver fork, went back to his breakfast, and quietly filed that devastating piece of information away in his brilliant, calculating mind. I wouldn't discover this massive secret for another 3 agonizing weeks. The highly anticipated bridal shower took place on a sunny Sunday in late April. I found out about the lavish party the exact same way you find out about a sudden thunderstorm. It was already pouring by the time I noticed the dark clouds. I tapped on Brianna's Instagram story while drinking my morning coffee. 35 wealthy women were gathered at an exclusive day spa in Groton. A towering pyramid of expensive champagne caught the golden afternoon light. Everyone wore matching silk robes. Someone held up a glittery sign that boldly read, "Future Mrs. Miller." My mother stood front and center in every single frame, her arm wrapped tightly around Brianna, beaming like a woman who had finally received the exact child she ordered from a luxury catalog. The typed caption below the photo felt like a physical punch to the gut. "My beautiful daughter and her tribe. So proud. Daughter. Singular." I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was a fiery emotion I had left miles behind on a dark highway I'd been driving my entire life. What washed over me instead was a freezing, crystal-clear realization. It was the profound peace that only arrives when you finally stop expecting anything from people who were never going to give you love anyway. Then the digital bank notification chimed on my laptop. A staggering $4,100 charge to a Groton luxury spa had just posted to a credit card bearing my name. It was an ancient, forgotten authorized user account from my college days. Janet had casually swiped it to fund the entire extravagant party. I dialed her number instantly. "Mom, there is a $4,000 charge on my card. Consider it your required contribution, since you couldn't be bothered to attend," she replied breezily. "I wasn't invited," I stated, my voice completely deadpan. A heavy, suffocating pause filled the line. "Don't start drama, Felicity." I hung up the phone without another word. I immediately called the fraud department, permanently removed myself from the toxic account, and officially disputed the massive theft. The bank resolved the issue in 14 days, but the emotional cost of that brief conversation couldn't be measured in dollars. Just 1 week later, the creeping pace of this impending disaster suddenly kicked into high gear. I drove out to the sprawling Linwood estate to drop off some custom-designed seating charts Brianna had practically demanded I create for free. While standing alone in the grand marble lobby, the stressed event manager, a tired-looking woman named Eleanor, nervously approached me. "Miss Harrison?" she whispered, anxiously glancing around the empty hall. "I just need to discreetly mention, Mr. Miller's secondary deposit for the upgraded ballroom lighting bounced this morning. I wouldn't normally bring this up to family, but a floral vendor from his previous charity gala strongly warned us he has a nasty history of bad checks. Please just ensure the final payment clears." My heart immediately began hammering a frantic, terrifying rhythm against my ribs. Bounced checks? A history with unpaid vendors? I forced a tight, polite smile, promised to handle the embarrassing situation, and practically sprinted out to my parked car with trembling hands. The invisible ticking clock had officially started. That night, sitting at my desk with complex design files open on both glowing monitors, I called Rebecca. "Something is horribly wrong with this family dynamic," I told her, panic edging into my throat. "And I think something is deeply wrong with Damien too. The background check is already running," my brilliant friend replied, her tone sharp and purely professional. "Give me 1 week." The tuxedo fitting was entirely Brianna's idea. She genuinely wanted Evan to serve as a junior usher, one of the few tender gestures that actually felt like it came from her heart, not Janet's twisted script. So, I drove my boy to a fancy tailor in Danvers on a breezy Wednesday afternoon, his heavy school backpack still slung over one shoulder. Damien strutted through the glass doors 30 minutes late, trailing 4 loud groomsmen. He carried the kind of obnoxious, overwhelming energy that fills a room by aggressively pushing everyone else into the corners. He spotted Evan standing nervously on the elevated fitting platform, wearing a half-pinned junior vest. Damien turned to his smug best man, Troy, flashing a cruel grin. He spoke just loud enough for everyone to hear, not a whisper. A deliberate stage comment designed to humiliate. Brianna insisted on including him. Damien scoffed. You know, the fatherless kid desperately needs a male role model from somewhere. Troy chuckled loudly. The other groomsmen offered tight, deeply uncomfortable smirks. The poor tailor awkwardly kept his eyes glued to his yellow measuring tape. Evan didn't move a single muscle. His small reflection in the 3-panel mirror stared blankly back at him. My sweet 11-year-old boy, standing in a stiff, unfinished suit, his cheeks flushing a hot, angry red from the collar up. I had been sitting quietly in the waiting area, but I walked into the main room just in time to witness my son's devastated expression. It was a locked-jaw stillness that proved he was desperately holding back tears with both hands. His name is Evan, I declared. My voice was dangerously level, though my fists were shaking violently inside my coat pockets. And he has absolutely everything he needs. Damien raised both palms in mock surrender, rolling his eyes. Relax, Felicity. It's just harmless guy talk. I held his mocking gaze for 4 agonizing seconds. He cowardly looked away first. We left the tailor shop in suffocating silence. But as I started the car engine, Evan turned to me with a look of pure, calculated steel. He was finally ready to drop the bomb he had been quietly carrying for weeks. On the tense drive home, Evan remained completely silent until our car finally hit the Mass Pike. The evening shadows stretched long and dark across the highway. Finally, his quiet voice broke through the hum of the tires. Mom, I saw something on Damien's phone at brunch. He paused, chewing nervously on his bottom lip. Messages from someone named V. They weren't normal messages. My stomach instantly dropped into my shoes. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. What do you mean, Ev? What did they say? I'll tell you everything when we get inside, he promised, his tone uncomfortably mature. 10 minutes later, we were sitting together at our small, scratched kitchen table. This was the exact spot where Evan did his math homework every night, where I spread out messy design proofs, where we shared takeout noodles on lazy Thursdays. In a matter of seconds, that ordinary, safe piece of furniture became the place where our entire universe shifted. At brunch, Evan explained carefully. When Damien went to the bathroom, his phone kept buzzing. The text messages popped right up on the lock screen. What exactly did they say? I urged, leaning forward. My brilliant son pulled out his own cell phone and opened the digital notepad. He had typed the secret messages from memory that very same afternoon, capturing them word for word, the exact way a smart kid who loves coding remembers complex computer language. He read them aloud into the quiet kitchen. V said, "Can't wait for this circus to be over," Damien replied. 4 years max, then I'm set. And V answered, "Just get through the wedding, babe." I sat frozen in my wooden chair. The kitchen faucet dripped slowly into the metal sink. The old refrigerator hummed its familiar tune. The horrifying reality of those few sentences crashed over me like a tidal wave. "I didn't want to cause trouble, Mom," Evan whispered. His brave voice suddenly sounded so incredibly small. "But after what he said about us today at the tailor shop, Evan," I reached across the table and grasped his warm hands tightly. "You did the exact right thing by telling me. You are so brave." He nodded slowly. I could physically see the heavy relief loosen his tense shoulders. The massive weight of carrying a grown man's dirty secret for 3 weeks was finally lifting off his narrow chest. I spent that entire night lying wide awake, staring blankly at the dark bedroom ceiling, turning the same agonizing puzzle over and over in my mind. If I brought this explosive information to Brianna, she would fiercely defend him and call me a jealous liar. If I brought it to Janet, she would label me a vicious saboteur trying to ruin her favorite daughter's perfect day. But if I stayed totally silent, my little sister would unknowingly marry a heartless user who referred to their sacred vows as a circus with a 4-year expiration date. The very next morning, as the sun barely peeked over the horizon, I called my lawyer friend. "Rebecca, I need you to run that background check right now. Dig into full public records. Pull his credit report if you can legally get it through a data broker. Find everything documented. Give me 10 days, she promised, her voice grave. And Felicity, if what your son saw is real, this situation isn't just about your sister's feelings anymore. This is dangerous. The extravagant rehearsal dinner took place 2 weeks later in a private, velvet-lined dining room at Maison Lyon. It was a wildly expensive French restaurant in Groton where a single tasting menu ran $210 a person. 50 inner circle guests gathered under dim, glowing chandeliers. Crystal stemware sparkled in the candlelight, surrounded by the low, polite murmurs of people who knew exactly how to perform wealth in public. Damien proudly stood up to give a toast. He held his wide glass of rich burgundy wine like a shiny prop in a one-man Broadway show. "To family," he announced loudly, letting the heavy words settle over the room. "The ones who actually show up." His dark, mocking eyes found mine across the long table. "And the ones who, well, try their best." Polite, uncomfortable laughter rippled through the wealthy crowd. Janet proudly raised her glass. Brianna squeezed Damien's arm, her eyes shining with blind devotion. I kept my facial expression completely blank, refusing to give him the satisfaction. Beside me, Evan silently cut his steak without looking up. Midway through the decadent chocolate dessert course, the simmering tension in the room snapped into high gear. A rushing waiter, carrying a large silver tray of empty glasses, rounded the sharp corner far too fast. He violently collided directly with the groom. Dark red wine splashed aggressively across Damien's pristine designer jacket, swearing viciously under his breath. Damien ripped the ruined coat off and furiously tossed it over the back of his chair. He immediately marched toward the restrooms, grabbing a cloth napkin, his charming mask momentarily slipping into pure ugly rage. But he forgot one crucial, catastrophic detail. His smartphone was still sitting deep inside the breast pocket. It started buzzing almost immediately. The frantic vibration rattled loudly against the wooden chair frame. Evan didn't hesitate for a single second. Before I could even blink, my brave 11-year-old son smoothly reached over, slipped his small hand into the damp jacket pocket, and pulled out Damien's glowing phone. Notification after notification popped up from V. The full preview text was completely visible. "Can't wait for this circus to be over. You know I'm the one you come home to. 4 years max, right?" Moving with shocking speed, Evan slid his own cheap phone from his pocket. Click, click, click. 4 crystal clear photos. Clean, sharp, and perfectly time-stamped. The contact name, the preview text, the exact minute, all permanently captured in the soft, flickering glow of the restaurant's candlelight. Then, swift as a shadow, he slid Damien's phone right back into the stained pocket, totally invisible. Damien returned 10 minutes later, smelling strongly of outdoor cigar smoke and toxic self-satisfaction. He casually picked up his jacket without a second glance. My amazing boy was the only person at that entire fancy table paying attention to the real truth. The morning after the rehearsal dinner, my mother sternly summoned me to her house in Groton. She was waiting stiffly in the grand living room, sipping hot espresso from a delicate porcelain cup. Her posture was so rigidly straight she looked like a marble statue. Everything about Janet Harrison was carefully curated to intimidate. Even the harsh way she delivered her threats. "I know you have strong opinions about Damien," she hissed before I had even taken off my winter coat. "You will keep them strictly to yourself tomorrow. This is Brianna's day." "Mom, I think there are serious things about him that Brianna desperately needs to know before she—" "Like what?" Janet slammed the fragile cup down, the loud clatter echoing sharply. "That he's far too good for this broken family. That a handsome man with his brilliant career and charm actually chose your sister. If anything, Felicity, that miracle should give a woman like you hope." "That is not what I'm saying." "Then what exactly are you saying?" She snapped back, standing up to smooth her expensive silk blouse. "Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like exactly what you always do. You constantly find a sneaky way to make Brianna's joy all about your own miserable unhappiness." She took a threatening step forward, her eyes flashing with pure malice. "Let me be crystal clear. If you cause any drama at that wedding tomorrow, any at all, you are out. No Thanksgiving, no Christmas, no phone calls. I will not have you embarrass this family's reputation again." Again, she tossed the cruel word like a dagger, as if my entire existence had been one long, humiliating burden. I turned around and walked out the front door without responding. There was absolutely nothing left to say to a stubborn woman who had already written the guilty verdict before ever hearing the evidence. But as I stepped out into the freezing morning air, my cell phone vibrated heavily in my coat pocket. The background check from Rebecca had finally arrived, and the terrifying truth hiding inside those digital pages was about to burn my mother's perfect fantasy to the ground. In the freezing car, I sat with the engine totally off for a full minute, struggling to breathe. My chest felt hollow. Then my phone chimed loudly in the quiet cabin. An urgent email from Rebecca Whitaker. Subject line, background results. Damian Miller. The body of the message contained exactly 3 terrifying words. Call me now. My fingers fumbled as I dialed her number. What my brilliant friend told me over the next 15 agonizing minutes completely changed everything. That shocking conversation shattered whatever lingering doubts I held. Rebecca didn't soften the blow. She never did. Her brutal honesty was the trait I admired most about her. Damian Miller currently carries $195,000 in personal debt, she announced flatly. How did you even find that legally? I gasped, my pulse suddenly racing like a runaway train. That's an absolute fortune. He slipped up. Rebecca's voice was sharp, moving a mile a minute through the phone speaker. He was sued in small claims court 3 months ago by a desperate ex-girlfriend named Samantha Davis. The messy records were unsealed by a judge. I tracked her down and contacted her directly. She gladly handed me his entire disastrous credit nightmare. Massive student loans, 3 completely maxed out credit cards, and a shady personal loan from a private lender at a crushing 21% interest rate. I quickly pulled the car over to the dusty shoulder of the road, my hands trembling. It gets worse, Rebecca continued relentlessly. His fancy employment at Wakefield and Partners ended 5 months ago. He was terminated. Not peacefully laid off, Felicity. Fired. Their HR filing legally describes his exit as a material misrepresentation of client investment accounts. He lied about money. He confidently told Brianna he's a senior partner there. There is absolutely no senior partner named Damian Miller. There hasn't been for nearly half a year. I squeezed my eyes shut. He's a ghost. A total fraud. And that fake company he keeps bragging about, she pushed on. Miller Property Group? I ran the legal records. It's a hollow registered LLC with 0 actual employees, 0 reported revenue, and a sketchy mailing address that traces directly to a tiny FedEx office in Somerville. I pressed my heavy forehead against the cold steering wheel, feeling sick to my stomach. He is not marrying your sister for love, Rebecca stated. Her tone was steady, clinical, the exact way it sounded when she was preparing for a brutal trial. He is marrying her for a clean balance sheet. He needs her money to survive. If I show this complicated paperwork to Brianna right now, she won't believe me, I whispered desperately. Janet will just claim I fabricated the whole thing out of spite. You won't have to fabricate a single sentence. This is all verified public record, my friend assured me fiercely. Official employment verification, signed LLC filings, Samantha's sworn legal affidavit. My professional bar number is stamped on every single page. Anyone can verify it. Then I need it printed, I demanded, adrenaline flooding my veins. Everything, tonight, already done. I'll drop the secure folder off at your apartment within the hour. I sat alone in my dark vehicle on the edge of the busy post road, watching oblivious traffic blur past my windshield. I finally had the hard proof, the digital screenshots from Evan, plus a certified background report from a licensed attorney. 2 completely separate sources, from 2 different moments in time, pointing directly at the exact same monster. What I still didn't have was a stubborn family willing to actually listen, but I couldn't just sit helplessly and wait for disaster to strike. The invisible ticking clock was deafening now. We had exactly 48 hours until the lavish wedding. Pure protective adrenaline was pushing my exhausted body into extreme overdrive. I didn't drive home. Instead, I pulled up the secret phone number Evan had photographed at the restaurant. I bravely texted the mysterious V. I confidently lied, claiming I was the frantic wedding coordinator and urgently needed to verify a surprise floral delivery for the groom. She immediately replied, giving me an address for a trendy coffee shop located in Somerville. 20 nervous minutes later, I pushed through the heavy glass doors. The warm smell of roasted beans hit my face. I recognized Valerie Lawson instantly from her public Instagram profile. Sleek blonde hair, a ridiculously expensive designer bag resting on the chair, casually sipping an iced green matcha. I marched over and sat directly across from her at the tiny table. Her relaxed smile vanished instantly. "Excuse me, who are you?" she snapped, clearly annoyed by the intrusion. "I am Brianna's older sister," I declared. My voice vibrated with a breathless, unstoppable intensity. Smack! I forcefully slammed a thick copy of the damning background check, along with Evan's brightly printed screenshots, right onto the wooden table between our cold drinks. "Damian is completely broke," I told her, my eyes locking onto hers. "He is nearly $200,000 in debt. He is cruelly using my little sister to pay it off. And he is selfishly using you to kill time." Valerie physically recoiled, pressing her back hard against her chair. For a terrifying second, the noisy cafe around us completely faded into dull white noise. Her wide, panicked eyes darted frantically from the legal papers to my intense face. She awkwardly tried to laugh, but the awful sound came out like a dry choke. "You're totally crazy," she stammered defensively. "Damien specifically warned me about you. He said Brianna was a crazy, obsessed stalker ex who maliciously trapped him, and her bitter family was constantly trying to ruin his life." "Read the official dates," I commanded, pushing the heavy stack of papers closer to her trembling hands. "Look closely at the HR termination letter. Look at his own text messages calling this sacred wedding a circus. He is legally marrying her this Saturday, Valerie. He is not trapped. He is the one actively laying the trap." I didn't wait around for her to start crying or screaming. I stood up tall, my tight chest heaving with exertion. "Don't let him do this to you too," I warned softly. Then I turned and walked straight out the door, leaving her sitting alone, staring blankly at the burning wreckage of her own toxic relationship. The heavy pieces were finally in motion. The massive avalanche had officially started. The fateful morning of the wedding quickly arrived. I stood silently in front of my bathroom mirror and made a permanent decision. I slipped on a simple navy blue wrap dress. It bore no fancy designer label, just a clean, sharp cut that fit perfectly. I pinned my hair back with a basic clip. Armor, that's what it felt like. Down the hall, Evan wore his dark suit from the disastrous fitting, the exact one Damien's cruel comment had stained with humiliation. My boy stood at the hallway mirror, carefully tying his own necktie, his tongue poking between his teeth in deep concentration. Something fierce and protective violently tightened inside my chest. "Ready?" I asked softly. "Ready," he replied, turning to face me. I carefully slipped a thick manila folder into my clutch purse. Rebecca's explosive report, 14 devastating pages, official letterhead, state bar number, perfectly date-stamped. "Only if absolutely necessary," I promised myself quietly. "Only if there is no other way to save her." Evan gently patted his left jacket pocket. "I have the digital screenshots, Mom, just in case." I knelt down to his eye level. "We are not here to cause an ugly scene, Ev. We are strictly here for your aunt." He looked right back at me. He appeared so incredibly calm, deeply serious, and entirely older than his 11 short years. "I know, but someone should be here for the actual truth, too." We arrived at the breathtaking Linwood estate exactly an hour before the outdoor ceremony. The humid air felt thick with the sweet scent of white gardenias and impending, heavy disaster. As Evan and I walked quietly down the narrow service corridor toward the grand ballroom, a strong hand violently shot out from a dark alcove and aggressively grabbed my elbow. It was the groom. Damien forcefully yanked me into the shadowed hidden hallway. He was sweating profusely. The pristine, confident Boglioli groomsman look was completely ruined by the frantic, breathless panic swirling in his wide eyes. "Valerie just called me crying," he hissed viciously, physically backing me against the flocked velvet wallpaper. "What the hell did you tell her?" "She completely blocked my number." I stared up at him. My heart hammered a frantic, terrifying rhythm high in my throat, but my face remained pure, unbothered ice. "I simply showed her the absolute truth, Damien. The public court records. Listen to me." He leaned in closer, his hot breath smelling of mint and raw desperation. His voice dropped to a venomous, pleading whisper. "I know you're completely broke, Felicity. You're struggling to survive. You just keep your mouth tightly shut today. You let this beautiful ceremony happen, and I will personally pay for Evan's entire college tuition in solid cash the very minute Janet's massive trust fund clears. Name your exact price right now. 50,000? 100,000? My stomach violently churned. He was literally trying to bribe my silence with my own deceived mother's stolen money. It was utterly sickening. "You are a disgusting monster," I whispered softly, my voice laced with pure disgust. Damien's handsome face instantly contorted into pure, ugly rage. Just at that exact moment, Evan bravely stepped into the dim hallway, his young eyes widening in alarm. "Mom?" Damien spun around quickly. In a sudden flash of vindictive, incredibly petty fury, the grown man deliberately tripped. He violently knocked his full, steaming cup of dark roast coffee straight forward. The scalding dark liquid splashed aggressively across Evan's crisp white shirt and the sharp lapel of his tailored suit. A massive, ugly brown stain bloomed instantly across the delicate fabric. "Oops," Damien snarled cruelly, his dark eyes locked intensely on mine, practically daring me to scream for help. "Clumsy kid, You both better sit quietly in the very back." He smugly straightened his silk tie, forced his charming fake mask back into place, and marched proudly toward the sunny altar. I immediately dropped to my bare knees on the hard floor, frantically dabbing at Evan's wet chest with a dry tissue, my hands shaking completely out of control. "Evan, sweetie, are you burned? We can leave right now. We can go straight home. We do not have to stay here." My son slowly looked down at the totally ruined suit, his small jaw locked firmly into that familiar, unbreakable concrete set. "No, Mom," he said, his steady voice terrifyingly calm. "I am wearing it. I want every single person in that room to see exactly what he did." The Linwood estate was exactly the kind of breathtaking, overpriced paradise Janet had always craved. Carved stone terraces were wrapped tightly in thick, climbing roses. The sweet, heavy scent of expensive flowers hung in the humid air, almost suffocating in its intensity. A professional string quartet played a soft melody in the lush garden. 250 chairs, perfectly draped in shining ivory silk, faced a towering floral archway. Glittering crystal hung from every possible surface, catching the late afternoon light and throwing it back, making the entire property shimmer like a glossy page pulled straight out of a luxury magazine. Near the grand main entrance, I spotted Damien. He was eagerly greeting arriving guests with the smooth, practiced ease of a politician who had rehearsed every single handshake in a mirror. He caught sight of me and immediately flashed a chilling, hollow smile that completely failed to reach his dead eyes. "So glad you could actually make it, Felicity," he purred smoothly, his gaze dropping to my plain outfit. I absolutely love the understated look. I walked right past his smug face without offering a single syllable in response. My energy was strictly reserved for survival. Inside the massive, echoing ballroom, we silently hunted for our designated place cards. We finally found them at table 14. It was shoved into the darkest back corner, practically pressed against the noisy swinging doors of the service kitchen. It was the ultimate insult, the hidden table they strictly reserve for people whose names are technically on the guest list, but whose actual presence is highly unwanted. Evan quietly picked up his small white card and read the elegant gold calligraphy. "Table 14, my brave boy whispered. "That's the table for people they secretly wish didn't come." So, there I sat, trapped at table 14. My small clutch bag rested heavy on my lap, hiding a certified background check that could destroy a life. My 11-year-old son sat rigidly next to me, guarding the digital screenshots on his phone, his suit lapel ruined by a violent, undeniable brown stain. And yet neither of us planned to use our weapons. I had walked into that grand venue fully prepared to swallow my pride, stay totally silent, and let Brianna simply have her magical fairy tale day. But then Damien opened his arrogant mouth. "Let me ask you something completely honest. If you held the devastating proof in your hands, but your own stubborn family blindly refused to listen, what would you do? Would you speak up and become the villain? Or would you stay quiet and watch them fall?" I will tell you exactly what happened next, and honestly, the choice was violently ripped right out of my hands. The wedding ceremony itself was undeniably beautiful. I will freely give it that. Brianna floated down the long white aisle wearing a stunning cathedral-length veil. Her arm was linked tightly through Janet's, since our estranged father had chosen a new wife in Arkansas over giving his own daughter away. Janet wore gleaming champagne silk, sporting a proud smile so dazzlingly wide it could have easily sold expensive diamonds. As the string quartet shifted into a sweeping romantic tune, 250 wealthy guests rose to their feet. Cell phones shot up into the air like a glittering field of glass flowers, eagerly recording the picture-perfect moment. And Brianna, my sweet little sister, the undisputed golden child, looked genuinely, heartbreakingly radiant. I desperately searched her glowing face and felt a terrible pang of doubt. What if I am entirely wrong? I panicked internally. What if, despite the lies and the crushing debt, this complicated man actually loves her? The older officiant opened his heavy leather book. Dearly beloved, Damien delivered his prepared vows without a single tiny stumble. He maintained intense eye contact, utilized perfectly measured pauses, and even allowed a fake, emotional crack in his deep voice at the exact right second. It was a completely flawless, award-winning performance. A weeping woman seated 3 rows ahead of me gently dabbed her eyes. Janet dramatically pressed a monogrammed lace handkerchief to her powdered cheek. Brianna's sweet vows were entirely different. Her soft voice shook with real emotion. Her delicate hands visibly trembled holding the microphone. She briefly forgot a line, let out a nervous, genuine laugh at herself, and bravely started over. Her love was painfully, unmistakably real. "I do," she promised. "I do," he lied. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." My tight grip on my purse slowly loosened. The hidden folder inside remained completely untouched. Evan's small hand rested quietly on his stained jacket pocket. I had officially missed the tiny window. The beautiful ceremony was over. They were married. At least they were married in the tearful eyes of the clapping crowd, tossing soft rose petals into the evening breeze. But here is a highly crucial fact about getting married in the state of Massachusetts. The outdoor ceremony is pure, decorative theater. The actual, binding legal part, the official marriage certificate, the required signature of the ordained officiant, the permanent county filing, always happens later. Usually it takes place quietly in a hidden back room right before the loud reception finally ends. Reverend Carter had not signed a single piece of binding paperwork yet. The blank legal document was still resting harmlessly on a small wooden table in the private filing room. They were deeply married in the eyes of the cheering guests, but they were absolutely not married in the strict eyes of the law. The ticking clock had secretly reset. The extravagant ballroom had been magically transformed into a scene pulled straight out of a royal magazine spread. A towering 10-tier cake sat proudly on a silver pedestal, decorated with cascading edible sugar flowers. Custom linen napkins featured their initials pressed in shiny gold foil. 250 guests happily settled into their plush chairs, creating the warm, pleasant hum of people who firmly believed they had just witnessed true romance. Then, it was time for the evening toasts. Janet eagerly took the central podium first. She gripped the microphone tightly with both hands, delivering a speech that felt like equal parts a theatrical performance and a cruel insult directed at the daughter she secretly despised. "I always knew one of my lovely daughters would eventually find someone truly worthy," Janet announced smoothly. She let the heavy emphasis land hard, like a dropped glass shattering on the floor. A few uncomfortable guests nervously glanced back toward table 14. I simply kept my blank eyes glued to the expensive floral centerpiece, swallowing the burning lump in my throat. Then it was Damien's turn. He grabbed the microphone with the confident, oily ease of a salesman who had pitched 100 shady deals to 100 gullible rooms. "I want to deeply thank everyone who showed up today," he began, flashing his brilliant, empty smile. "Even those who, well, let's just say not everyone in this family fully believed in our love." He looked directly, purposefully at me. This was no longer a casual, harmless joke. This was a desperate man who secretly knew his entire financial survival depended heavily on completely discrediting my reputation before I could ever open my mouth. I could actually see tiny beads of nervous sweat forming on his forehead. The rapid speed of his speech was just a tiny fraction too fast. The entire grand room followed his cruel gaze. Troy, the smirking best man, leaned aggressively into a side microphone. "Yeah, we almost had to assign a sad +1 for Felicity, but she brought her little kid instead." Laughter erupted. Loud, rolling, deeply ugly laughter that bounced harshly off the crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. Damien eagerly rode the cruel wave. "Come on, Troy. Be nice," he mocked, timing his delivery like a seasoned comedian. "Felicity is. She's doing her best. She's just a pathetic single mom trying to desperately figure it out." The entire ballroom exploded. 250 wealthy, beautifully dressed people were openly laughing at my painful life. I felt a humiliating, fiery heat rise swiftly from my collarbones straight to my pounding temples. My stiff fingers pressed completely flat against the rough tablecloth. I didn't move a muscle. I completely forgot how to breathe. The public execution was absolute, but as the crushing weight of their laughter reached its absolute peak, I suddenly heard the sharp, terrifying scrape of wood against the floor. Evan's chair was violently sliding back. Evan's crumpled white napkin hit the table. His chair scraped harshly against the polished hardwood. He was on his feet before my stunned brain could process what was actually happening. "Evan," I gasped, instinctively grabbing his small wrist. "Sit down." He looked down at me. 11 years old, wearing a cheap, dark suit from a strip mall store, a massive, humiliating coffee stain acting as a brave badge of honor right on his chest. His jaw was set like solid concrete. "No, Mom," he gently pulled his arm free. Then he started walking. He marched straight across the glittering ballroom, past table 13, past table 12, past table 8. He walked right past the absurd 10-tier cake, ignoring the monogrammed linen napkins and the 250 wealthy guests who had just cruelly laughed at his mother. He marched all the way to the brightly lit front of the room, confidently stepped onto the small wooden platform, and boldly took the microphone directly from its tall stand. The entire room noticed the tiny intruder. Boisterous conversations instantly stalled. Silver forks paused midair. Tap, tap. Evan hit the mic once. The sharp sound popped loudly through the massive speakers, demanding absolute attention. "I know something about the groom," my boy announced. The grand ballroom went completely, terrifyingly silent. Every single set of eyes in that massive space locked onto my son. He stood alone at the decorated podium, his narrow shoulders pushed back, chin held high. The bright overhead chandelier caught the cheap lapels of his off-the-rack suit. He looked impossibly small against the towering backdrop of the expensive flower arch. But his young voice did not waver, not even a fraction. 3 weeks ago at the rehearsal dinner, Evan projected clearly into the breathless crowd. "I saw secret messages on your phone, Damien." The groom was still standing near the head table, his crystal champagne glass frozen midway to his mouth. His charming smile remained plastered on his face, but something dark behind his eyes violently shifted. It was a rapid flicker, exactly like a light bulb about to burn out. "Kid, sit down." Damien let out a short, breathy laugh, but his smooth tone cracked terribly. He took a physical, threatening step toward my son, sudden panic seizing his limbs. "This isn't a funny game." Evan didn't flinch. He didn't retreat. "Messages from someone named Valerie. She called this wedding a circus. You told her 4 years max." A low, buzzing murmur started at the very back of the room and rippled rapidly forward like a harsh wind blowing across open water. Confused heads turned. Expensive drinks were lowered to tables. 250 people simultaneously began to recalculate the handsome man standing in the designer suit. Janet shot to her feet, her face purple with outrage. "Felicity, control your child immediately." I was already standing. I had pushed my chair back the exact moment Evan reached the wooden platform. I didn't get up to pull him away, though. I moved just to be close if he needed me. I stood 10 feet directly behind him, and I absolutely did not call him back. Damien shifted his weight from side to side, sweating through his collar. "He's just a confused kid. He's making things up for attention. He doesn't know what he's talking about." Without missing a beat, Evan reached deep into his stained jacket pocket and proudly held up his cheap cell phone. The digital screen glowed a bright, icy blue in the dim ballroom light. I have the actual screenshots on my phone right now. Dead silence returned. It was the suffocating kind of quiet that possesses real physical weight, the kind of heavy pressure that presses painfully against your eardrums and makes an entire crowd completely forget to inhale. Damien's fake smile finally dropped, sliding completely off his face, and for the very first time since I had met him in my mother's hallway, I saw a genuine emotion cross his features. Raw, unfiltered fear. I slowly walked up onto the platform. No frantic rushing, no messy drama, just a fiercely protective mother standing proudly next to her brave son. I didn't snatch the heavy microphone from his hands. I simply stood beside him, resting my palm gently on his trembling shoulder. It was steady, grounding, and the only physical contact I needed to offer. "My son is telling the exact truth," I spoke clearly into the mic, sharing the heavy burden with him, and I brought the legal documentation to fully support it. I popped open my clutch purse, pulled out the thick manila folder, and held it high in the air so the front tables could easily see Rebecca Whitaker's official law firm letterhead. Clean, professional, undeniable. Damien Miller was officially terminated from Wakefield and Partners 5 months ago for severe misrepresentation of client funds, I announced, my voice slicing through the heavy air. His supposed company, Miller Property Group, is a registered shell corporation. It has 0 revenue, 0 actual employees, and a fake mailing address located at a tiny shipping store in Somerville. I paused, letting the devastating facts sink into their shocked minds. He is currently carrying $195,000 in massive personal debt. Gasps. Not quiet whispers, loud echoing gasps. The kind of shocked sounds that violently puncture the atmosphere of a room like a sharp needle tearing through delicate silk. Damien's handsome face instantly lost 2 full shades of color. "This is completely insane. Brianna, tell them this is crazy." My sister stood up slowly from the main head table. Her long veil was still securely pinned in her beautiful hair. Her bridal bouquet lay abandoned on the linen cloth where she had placed it during dinner. Her face was the exact pale color of the white tablecloth. "Damien." Her voice was barely above a fragile whisper. "Is this true?" "She's lying," Damien screamed, pointing a shaking finger directly at me. "She's always been jealous of you. She completely fabricated this garbage." The report was pulled directly from unsealed public court records by a licensed attorney, I stated calmly. I flipped the heavy folder open to the very last page and held it outward. "Her name is Rebecca Whitaker. Her active state bar number is printed on every single page. You are all more than welcome to verify it." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to scream. The official paperwork was screaming loudly enough for everyone to hear. Brianna stepped numbly around the long table and reached out for the folder. She grasped the first page with both trembling hands. Her tight grip left small, desperate creases in the thick paper. She began to read. And as her eyes scanned the lines of text, her expression completely transformed. Not all at once, but in slow, agonizing layers, exactly like watching a frozen lake crack violently from the inside out. "You swore to me Miller Property Group had 12 employees, she whispered, looking up at him with shattered eyes. "Brianna, baby, please, if you just let me explain. You promised me you just closed a $5 million deal last month. There's complicated business context to all of this," he pleaded frantically. "You told me a prenup was a disgusting insult to our true love." Her voice brutally broke on that final word. It wasn't just sadness leaking out. It was the devastating sound of an entire fairy tale violently shattering against a brick wall of reality. The frantic murmurs were rapidly spreading now. Guests seated at the front tables had heard every single word of the confrontation. Those seated farther back were craning their necks, whispering aggressively, passing juicy fragments of the scandal down the rows like electric current running through water. Evan silently held his glowing phone forward. The nearest table was filled with Janet's wealthy friends, country club donors wrapped in expensive designer gowns. They leaned in eagerly. His small screen displayed the damning text messages perfectly clearly. V at the very top. The cruel timestamps. The message previews. "Can't wait for this circus to be over. 4 years max, right?" The device moved from one manicured hand to the next. I watched a sophisticated woman named Martha, one of my mother's oldest, dearest friends, hold the screen at arm's length. She read the awful words and immediately clamped her hand over her mouth in sheer horror. "Oh my God," she gasped, loud enough for 3 surrounding tables to clearly hear. "The awful messages are absolutely real." Troy, Damien's loyal best man, took a slow step backward. Then another. He was physically distancing his own body from the fraud he had proudly stood beside at the floral altar barely 40 minutes earlier. Damien lunged forward, desperately grabbing Brianna's bare arm. "We need to talk about this privately right now." Brianna ripped her arm free with a sudden explosive force that made the nearest guests physically flinch. "Don't touch me." Her voice was wrapped in raw, bleeding grief. "Don't you dare ever touch me again." What unfolded next was textbook manipulation. I mean that quite literally. My lawyer friend Rebecca had once described the toxic behavior to me over coffee. Deny, attack, and reverse the victim and offender. Damien ran the cruel playbook in real time. He spun toward the massive crowd, throwing his arms wide open, pitching his voice loud enough to carry over the chaos. "Are you all really going to sit here and let a bitter, divorced loser and her damaged kid ruin this beautiful day?" he roared, pointing his finger at my chest like a loaded weapon. "She has been maliciously trying to sabotage this wedding from day one. Just ask Janet. She'll tell you the truth." Janet slowly opened her mouth. For 35 long years, my mother had never once failed to take the opposing side of any argument if it meant keeping me locked safely in my designated inferior place. But Brianna got to her first. "Mom, stop." 2 simple words, and miraculously Janet snapped her mouth shut. Panicking wildly, Damien pivoted his attack toward Evan. "You illegally went through my personal phone. That's a massive violation of my privacy. You had absolutely no right to touch my property." A deep, booming voice from the 4th table suddenly cut through the chaotic ballroom. It was a distinguished man in his late 60s with thick silver hair and reading glasses pushed high up on his forehead. Brianna's Uncle Mitchell, a highly respected senior attorney by trade. "The actual content of those messages is significantly more relevant than how the boy obtained them," Mitchell stated. His tone carried the calm, crushing authority of a man who had spent 45 years dominating courtrooms. "I'd sit down and keep quiet if I were you, young man." Damien didn't sit. His charming mask didn't just slip off, it completely shattered into a million sharp pieces. His jaw tightened into a dangerous block of rage. His posture shifted dramatically from smooth charm to something cornered, wild, and feral. He turned his burning eyes back on me. "You have absolutely no idea what you've just done. I will sue you for everything you own for this defamation. I will gladly go to court for repeating verified public records." I stared right back, completely unfazed. He glared intensely at me, breathing heavily. I held my ground, and in that tense silence I realized a profound, life-changing truth. I should have recognized it the very first time he arrogantly scanned my mother's living room like a greedy appraiser. Damian Miller was a bully who had never once been challenged by someone who wasn't secretly terrified of him. He had absolutely no idea what to do with a woman who refused to back down. The grand room held its collective breath, waiting for the desperate groom's next move. But it wasn't Damian who delivered the final fatal blow to the illusion. It was the weeping bride herself. I need to pause my story right here for just a brief second. What unfolded next permanently altered the entire dynamic between my little sister, my difficult mother, and my brave son. Before I finish revealing the end of this nightmare, I want to ask you a deeply personal question. If your own flesh and blood had spent decades aggressively treating you like you were somehow defective, and then one single afternoon proved them all spectacularly wrong, would you immediately forgive them? Type 1 if you would open your arms. Type 2 if you would turn your back and walk away forever. Type 3 if it entirely depends on their next move. There is absolutely no wrong answer to this puzzle. But my ultimate choice might genuinely surprise you. Brianna slowly walked up to the microphone. This was not the confident, joyful glide she had used while floating down the flower-lined aisle an hour earlier. This pace was painfully sluggish, weighed down by the crushing reality of what she had just discovered, and the smoking wreckage of the future she had just lost. 250 shocked people watched her in complete, breathless silence. She gripped the metal mic stand with one trembling hand and spoke with stunning clarity. "The official marriage certificate hasn't been signed yet." She turned her tear-streaked face toward the elderly officiant. Reverend Carter had been standing nervously near the service corridor, wearing an expression caught right between professional composure and sheer personal horror. "Reverend Carter, please do not file that legal paperwork," she instructed firmly. He simply nodded once in quiet agreement. Then Brianna slowly turned to face the man she thought she loved. Whatever delicate magic was left of the lavish fairy tale, the giant diamond ring, the expensive estate, the towering sugar cake, she let it all burn to the ground in 4 simple words. "We are absolutely done." "Brianna, sweetheart, you're just being highly emotional," Damian protested. His previously smooth tone now possessed the strained, desperate pitch of a cornered animal watching its ultimate exit strategy rapidly collapse in real time. "Let's go somewhere private and discuss this rationally," I said. "We are done." She took a deep, shuddering breath, her posture straightening. "And that luxury venue contract is legally in your name, Damian. You aggressively insisted on signing it yourself. The $95,000 non-refundable deposit. That massive debt is exclusively your problem now." I watched the horrifying realization crash across his handsome face. It visibly started in his wide, panicked eyes, a rapid, terrified recalculation, and quickly traveled down to his trembling hands, which he clenched fiercely at his sides. He had proudly signed that binding agreement. He had arrogantly demanded it. "Let me handle this. A man takes care of these legalities." Those were his exact words, blindly quoted back to me by Brianna just 4 months ago. The estate's strict contract was ironclad, $95,000 securely tied to the legal name Damian T. Miller. My mother's money had originally funded the account, but his greedy signature had legally claimed the ultimate financial responsibility. Now that exact greed was his heavy, sinking anchor. Damian frantically looked around the ballroom for a single ally. His dark eyes swept the massive room the exact same calculating way they had measured my mother's expensive living room on that very first day, searching desperately for leverage. Troy, his smug best man, was already gone. He had cowardly slipped out through the open garden terrace sometime during Evan's brave speech. The remaining groomsmen were intently studying their shiny shoes, their folded napkins, the hardwood floor. Absolutely anything that wasn't their disgraced friend. In a final act of desperation, Damian turned to Janet. My mother stood stiffly by the ruined head table, her crystal champagne glass still clutched tightly in her pale hand, perfectly motionless. For the very first time in my entire existence, I watched the mighty Janet Harrison have absolutely nothing to say. Damian waited, breathless. Janet remained silent. "You are all going to deeply regret this," he sneered. Though the threat sounded incredibly weak, his voice was thin, completely stripped of its polished, designer armor. He angrily pointed a shaking finger at me, then at my young son, then at the entire crowd. No one responded. 250 people offered him nothing but cold, judging silence. Defeated, he turned on his heel and marched swiftly toward the grand exit. The harsh sound of his dress shoes smacking against the polished hardwood was the loudest noise in the cavernous space. Each heavy step echoed loudly through a beautiful ballroom originally designed for joyful music, warm toasts, and happy applause. He never once looked back. The heavy double doors swung open, allowing a bright rectangle of evening sunlight to fall across the floor. Then the heavy wood slammed shut, and he was gone. No one chased after him. Not his loyal groomsmen, not his wealthy guests, not the sobbing woman who had eagerly walked down the aisle toward his waiting arms less than an hour ago. 250 people watched the fraud leave, and not a single soul moved an inch to stop him. I stood firmly in my place, my hand still resting protectively on Evan's small shoulder. The explosive folder remained on the wooden podium, its damning pages clearly visible. From across the tense room, Brianna was staring directly at me, not at the exit Damien had cowardly escaped through, not at the unsigned legal document resting on the officiant's table. She was looking strictly at me, and deep within her swollen eyes, I saw something beautiful I hadn't seen directed my way in a very long time. She truly saw me. The grand ballroom awkwardly hovered in that uncomfortable, uncertain space between a ruined event and its messy aftermath. Confused guests murmured quietly to each other, unsure whether to quickly flee or politely stay. The catering staff stood completely frozen near the swinging kitchen doors. Janet finally moved. She had remained practically bolted to the floor near the head table. When she finally opened her mouth, her toxic words were predictably aimed right at my chest. "Are you finally happy now?" Her tone was dangerously quiet, yet it carried clearly across the space. "You successfully ruined your own sister's wedding." I met her furious gaze without flinching. "Mom, I didn't ruin a single thing today. Damien did. If you hadn't made such a disgusting spectacle of yourself, Felicity did not make a spectacle." Brianna's fierce voice sliced through the air from behind Janet, sharp enough to effortlessly cut thick glass. "She actively saved my life today. Do you even understand that?" Janet slowly turned around to face her favorite daughter. I watched my mother desperately search her mind for the familiar script, the prepared emotional response, the practiced deflection she always kept ready like a weapon. For the first time ever, her mental teleprompter was completely blank. "And the awful things you said about her tonight," Brianna continued, her voice gaining undeniable strength. "A discount model with a scratched label. You actually announced that vile insult in front of 250 people, about your very own daughter." Janet's painted lips parted, but no sound emerged. "That is exactly who you are, Mom," Brianna declared, her voice cracking slightly under the massive weight of the realization. "But that is absolutely not who Felicity is." Something fundamental inside Janet's rigid face physically shifted. It wasn't genuine contrition. Not yet, anyway. It was far closer to the terrified expression of a stubborn woman who had spent decades meticulously building a fragile stage, only to watch it instantly collapse beneath her own feet. Her manicured hand trembled violently. She slowly set the crystal champagne glass down. Martha, her oldest and most loyal friend, gently took her stiff arm. "Janet, dear, let's just sit down." For once, my mother offered no resistance. She allowed herself to be softly guided to a nearby chair. She sank into the silk cushions and didn't speak another word for the rest of the agonizing evening. Then Brianna, the girl who had always cowardly looked down at her glowing phone screen whenever the family cruelty flew in my direction, lifted her chin and walked purposely toward me. The remaining guests had mercifully begun drifting toward the main exits, giving our shattered family some much-needed space. The magnificent cake stood abandoned. Brianna stopped just inches in front of me. She didn't offer a single word. She just reached her arms forward and held on for dear life. It was the very first authentic, meaningful hug between us in years. Not the fake, performative kind. This embrace was full, desperate, and incredibly tight. Her wet face pressed firmly into my shoulder, her delicate veil snagging clumsily on my earring. She was shaking uncontrollably. "I should have listened to you," she sobbed into my collarbone. "4 months ago, at the cafe. You tried to warn me. You simply weren't ready to hear the truth back then." I whispered gently, stroking her hair. "That's okay." "It's not okay." She pulled back slightly, dark mascara heavily streaking her pale cheeks. The awful bridal shower, the cruel bridesmaid exclusion, sitting there silently while Mom constantly said those unforgivable things to you. While Damien, Her voice broke into a jagged sob. I never once stopped him. I never stopped any of them. We will figure it out, I promised her. She sniffled, looking past my shoulder. She spotted Evan standing a few feet away, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Brianna immediately stepped toward him. I watched in awe as my 28-year-old sister gracefully knelt down on the sticky ballroom floor, her expensive cathedral-length dress pooling around her knees, and looked my young son directly in the eye. Thank you, Evan. Her voice steadied, filled with profound gratitude. You are without a doubt the bravest person in this entire room. Evan awkwardly shifted his weight, his cheeks flushing pink. I just told the truth, Aunt Brianna. She reached up and softly straightened his cheap necktie. Something incredibly tender in that simple gesture completely undid the tight knot in my own chest. Then Brianna stood up tall. She reached over, firmly unclasped the massive Tacori diamond ring from her left finger, and dropped it onto the nearest table with a dull thud. He can have it back, she stated fiercely. It probably isn't even paid for either. 3 short days after the explosive wedding that wasn't, Rebecca finally called me to provide the complete devastating picture. The marriage certificate was never legally signed, my brilliant friend confirmed happily. Reverend Carter verified it in official writing. Brianna won't even need a messy annulment. There is legally nothing to annul. I let that massive relief settle into my bones. 8 stressful months of intense planning, over $200,000 burned, hundreds of guests gathered, and legally, it was exactly as if the chaotic day had never even existed. Now, regarding the luxury venue, Rebecca continued, her tone shifting into a sharp, clinical mode. I spoke directly with the Linwood Estates event manager. That ironclad contract is exclusively in Damian Miller's legal name. It bears his arrogant signature, which means it holds his sole financial liability. The $95,000 initial deposit is completely non-refundable. Brianna and your mother have absolutely zero legal financial obligation to pay the remaining balance. The financial math was absolutely brutal. The venue deposit alone was nearly $100,000. Add the wedding-related charges he had foolishly put on his own maxed-out credit cards, which totaled roughly another $35,000. Add that staggering sum to his pre-existing hidden debt of $195,000. Damian Miller was currently staring down a dark, inescapable financial hole resting just north of $325,000. He would likely need to officially file for bankruptcy within the year. There was just one final, beautiful piece of karma: the intense social media fallout. Several wealthy guests had discreetly posted from the dramatic reception. Within 72 hours, Damian's former prestigious employer issued a brief but brutal public statement legally confirming he had been terminated for fraud. Furthermore, Valerie Lawson had completely blocked Damian on every single digital platform. He had confidently gambled everything on the prestigious Harrison family name. He foolishly lost the Harrison money, he permanently destroyed his own professional reputation, and he lost the secret woman he had smugly kept on the side. But the most shocking twist of all was yet to come, and it would arrive in the form of an unexpected phone call that would change my entire future. 10 days later, my cell phone softly vibrated on the kitchen counter. I stared at the caller ID. Mom, my finger hovered over the glowing red reject button. Do I even have the strength for another battle today? But something pushed me to swipe green. I almost didn't recognize her voice. It was shockingly fragile, completely stripped of the thick, glossy lacquer she normally applied before speaking to me. Martha gently suggested I should call, Janet whispered. A long, agonizing pause stretched over the line. She said, I owe you a massive apology. I didn't offer a polite response to rescue her. I simply let the dead silence do exactly what silence does best. Force the other person to nervously fill the empty space with something honest. The awful things I said at the reception, Janet continued, her breathing shaky. And honestly, before the wedding. She stopped, choked back a sob, and started again. For years, Felicity, the cruel things I've said for years. Okay, I replied neutrally. I was just so afraid. The painful words tumbled out, cracked and broken, sounding like she had been frantically rehearsing them but still couldn't get the edges smooth. After your father abandoned us, I was absolutely terrified that my beautiful daughters would eventually end up exactly like me. Totally alone. And when you finally got divorced, I saw my own tragic reflection in you. And I hated it. There it was, the ugly truth laid bare. It wasn't the apology itself that struck me, but the hidden architecture behind her lifelong cruelty. She hadn't been punishing me for being a struggling single mother. She had been punishing me for reminding her that she was one too. So you punished my life to hide your own fear. I stated softly. Yes. Another heavy pause, far longer this time. That is a good start, Mom, I breathed. But fixing this is going to take a lot more than one phone call. I know. You spent 35 long years actively making me feel like the wrong daughter. You screamed it in front of 250 people. You turned my painful existence into cheap entertainment. I know. So I am not going to blindly tell you everything is fine, because it isn't. I understand. We sat together in the heavy silence. It wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't a war zone anymore. It felt more like two exhausted people standing on opposite sides of a rushing river, fully aware of the massive distance between them for the very first time. I would really like to try, Janet pleaded. Then try, I challenged her gently. But I am not meeting you halfway anymore. You have much further to walk. One short month later, my little sister was already transforming into an entirely different person. It wasn't an instant magical fix. Those only exist in childish fairy tales. But her sharp edges were actively shifting. She quickly hired a fierce lawyer, someone Rebecca highly recommended, to ruthlessly audit every single shared financial account. The shocking discovery was immediate. Damien had secretly opened a joint credit card in both their names without Brianna having any clue. $15,000 in reckless charges, fancy restaurants, designer clothing, and a romantic weekend trip to Cape Cod that Brianna had never even been invited to. She swiftly filed an aggressive fraud report with the bank. The stolen funds were legally reversed within 3 weeks. The toxic account was permanently closed, and Damien's name was heavily flagged in the national credit system. Then, she sold the massive Tacori diamond ring for $16,000. She proudly used that exact cash to put a solid down payment on a tiny one-bedroom apartment in Norwood. It was her very first home that wasn't strictly chosen by Janet or heavily funded by Damien. Small, impeccably clean, featuring a narrow galley kitchen and a bright window overlooking a quiet courtyard with one stubborn oak tree. She bravely started trauma therapy. Twice a week at first, then down to once. It was the kind of quiet, deeply difficult mental work that doesn't make for an exciting movie script, but builds a much healthier, stronger life. She called me late on a rainy Wednesday night in mid-November. Her voice sounded clearer than I had heard it in over a decade. "You were totally right about everything," she whispered into the receiver. "And I was incredibly wrong about so many things, especially you." "You weren't wrong about wanting to be loved, Bree," I reminded her warmly. "You were just wrong about who actually deserved your precious trust." "I have a framed photo of us sitting on my new bookshelf right now," she told me, her tone brightening. "From when I was 7 and you were 12. We were laughing at that sunny lake house in Virginia. I remember that day perfectly. It's the only picture I've put up in the apartment so far." My little sister sold a fake diamond worth a fortune and happily called it the greatest trade she ever made. I believed her with my whole heart. The chilling email arrived on a freezing Wednesday morning in December from a total stranger. "Dear Felicity, my name is Samantha Davis. I am 29 years old, and I am a single mother of a 4-year-old daughter. I am writing to you today because I saw the viral video from your sister's wedding. A close friend shared a shocking clip that one of the guests secretly posted online. I recognized Damien Miller immediately. I read the rest of the message while standing frozen at my kitchen counter, my morning coffee going completely cold in my shaking hand. Samantha had casually dated Damien 3 years before he ever met Brianna. He used the exact same wicked playbook, a charming, sweeping entrance, rapid promises of extreme commitment, followed by deep financial entanglement. He had smoothly moved into her apartment within 4 short months, secretly run up $9,000 on her credit cards, and cowardly disappeared into the night the second she started asking hard questions about his actual income. "I blamed myself every single day for 3 years," Samantha wrote. "I thought I was foolish. I thought I was just incredibly stupid. But then, I watched your brave son stand up in front of a massive crowd and say exactly what I had been far too terrified to say to anyone." She had finally filed a formal legal complaint with the Massachusetts Department of Consumer Protection, officially creating a permanent paper trail. It documented Damien's predatory pattern and his long history of financial abuse across multiple innocent relationships. I immediately forwarded the message to Rebecca. That evening I sat down and showed the powerful email to Evan. He read it silently at our scratched kitchen table, the exact same spot where he had first confessed the secret text messages. "She said I actually helped her heal," he murmured quietly, his eyes wide with wonder. "I didn't even know she existed in the world." "That is usually how the universe works, Ev," I explained softly, brushing his hair back. You bravely tell the truth to protect one single person, and it magically reaches someone else who desperately needed to hear it. He set the phone down, looking at me with an expression that was half 11-year-old boy and half something ancient and wise. I just told the simple truth, Mom. That is exactly the point, kiddo. That is exactly the point. 4 months after the wedding that thankfully never happened, my entire universe expanded. I sat directly across from a wealthy startup founder at a busy coffee shop in West Holyoke. I confidently signed a massive branding contract worth more money than any single graphic design project I had landed in a dozen years. He had been a guest at the wedding, seated at table 10. He told me he didn't remember the expensive sugar cake, the fancy flowers, or the luxury venue. What he vividly remembered was the fierce woman who stood at the wooden podium with a legal report, maintaining a steady voice, effortlessly dismantling a professional con artist without ever having to scream. That is the exact kind of brilliant clarity I want representing my company brand, he declared. I laughed out loud. It was the very first time the memory of that chaotic wedding had actually brought me joy. By late January, my loyal client list had multiplied by 4, all wealthy referrals from that explosive night. My monthly income shot up 45%. For the very first time in my adult life, the comforting word stable applied to my bank account, not just my stubborn personality. Evan was absolutely thriving. He happily started a computer coding club at his middle school and was actively building a helpful app that tracked library book availability in real time. It was a nerdy project that made absolutely zero commercial sense, yet it made me prouder than any fancy logo I had ever designed. Brianna and I officially met for dinner every single Thursday. We were incredibly careful with each other's feelings, treating our fragile bond the way you handle a precious vase that recently broke and is slowly being glued back together. We didn't pretend the last 8 toxic years hadn't happened. We didn't falsely fast forward to some fake, perfect reconciliation. We just faithfully showed up every Thursday and practiced being completely honest. I had spent 35 years wrongly believing I was the permanently damaged one, the heavily scratched label, the sad discount model, the unwanted daughter shoved into the dark corner. But the glorious truth was, I was the only person in that entire family who wasn't secretly for sale, and when the massive emotional bill finally came due, I was the only one rich enough in spirit to afford it. Janet bravely started going to therapy in late December. It was Brianna's firm suggestion, but it was my absolute condition for contact. She didn't magically transform overnight. I want to be brutally clear about that fact, because this isn't a cheesy movie where the villain suddenly sees the bright light, everyone hugs crying, and the uplifting credits roll. Janet was still very much Janet. She still fussed obsessively over public appearances. She still occasionally said blunt things that landed entirely sideways. But tiny, beautiful things began to shift. She proudly posted a picture on Facebook in early January. It featured both of her daughters standing side by side, smiling from a warm Thanksgiving dinner she had actually invited me to attend. The typed caption below simply read, "My daughters, both of them," 3 tiny words, completely unremarkable to anyone mindlessly scrolling past, but I saw them clearly. I saved the digital screenshot and I sat crying with it for a very long time. She had called me the week before that holiday. Not with a harsh command, but with a gentle question. "Would you and Evan please like to come over for Thanksgiving? I am making your special recipe for the sweet potatoes, the delicious one with the toasted pecans." She remembered my recipe. In 35 years of lavish family feasts, she had never once cooked anything of mine. "We will be there," I promised. And we were. The turkey dinner was slightly awkward in certain places. Janet nervously corrected herself twice mid-sentence, her toxic old habits surfacing before quickly being swallowed back down. Brianna shot me a knowing look across the table each time, sharing a secret mix of amusement and relief. After dessert, I walked down the long hallway toward the bathroom and suddenly stopped dead in my tracks. On the expensive wooden shelf, the exact same spot that had exclusively held nothing but Brianna's modeling photos for as long as I could remember, there was a newly framed school portrait of Evan. It sat proudly right next to Brianna's picture, which Janet had quietly swapped from a fake engagement pose to a candid shot of my sister happily smiling into a coffee mug. My complicated mother didn't magically become a flawless person, but she finally stopped pretending my son and I were entirely invisible. And some days, that tiny victory is more than enough. It was a freezing Saturday night in late February, bitterly cold outside. wonderfully warm inside. Evan and I were curled up comfortably on our soft couch, with a giant bowl of buttery microwave popcorn resting between us. We were half watching a fascinating documentary about glowing deep-sea creatures that he had eagerly picked out, and I was desperately pretending to understand. "Mom," he whispered, his eyes still glued to the glowing television screen, "do you ever wish I hadn't gone up to that microphone?" I instantly muted the loud TV. The room went totally quiet. "Every single day of my life," I answered honestly. He quickly turned his head to look at me, clearly surprised by the blunt admission. I could actually see his fast brain recalculating. This was not the heroic answer he had expected to hear. "Because you shouldn't have had to do that, Evan," I explained softly, pulling the warm blanket higher over his shoulders. "An 11-year-old child should never have to fiercely protect his own mother from her own family. That was absolutely never your job." He was deeply quiet for a long moment. The strange glowing sea creatures drifted silently across the dark screen. "But I am so incredibly proud of you," I continued, my throat tightening with emotion. "Not just because you exposed a terrible liar, because you bravely stood up for what was fundamentally right, when every single wealthy adult in that giant room cowardly chose comfort over the harsh truth. You chose the truth." He picked nervously at the greasy edge of the plastic popcorn bowl. "I didn't do it for the truth, Mom." "Then why did you do it?" He looked up at me the way he sometimes did, direct, unblinking, possessing that intense, undeniable gravity that constantly startled adults who just expected a normal kid. "Because nobody on this earth gets to talk about my mother like that. Not ever." I pulled his small body fiercely against my chest. He actually let me hold him tightly for a full 15 seconds before awkwardly squirming away, which, for an independent middle school boy, was the absolute equivalent of a roaring standing ovation. We sat there together in the peaceful quiet. The cheap fairy lights he had proudly strung along the top of our bookshelf last Christmas glowed a warm, safe amber against the painted wall. My beautiful artwork hung securely in frames I had personally chosen. 2 steaming mugs of hot cocoa cooled slowly on the wooden coffee table. Absolutely nothing in this tiny apartment was considered luxury, but every single thing inside it was purely ours. Every square foot, every brave choice, every bright lamp, every honest truth. If you have actually made it this far, if you have been truly deeply listening to my journey, then maybe you see a tiny piece of yourself hidden in this story somewhere. Maybe you are the tired person who always gets shoved into table 14, the one whose own family constantly makes you feel like a permanently scratched label, the one who has been told over and over again by the exact people who should love you the most that you are simply not enough, not successful enough, not pretty enough, not married enough, just broken. I desperately want you to hear this truth. Your human worth is absolutely not determined by the cruel person sitting next to you, or by the terrible person who walked away. It is never measured by a fancy job title, a diamond ring, or an expensive zip code. And the loudest, meanest people in the room, the ones who laugh the hardest, who point their fingers the fastest, who constantly rank everyone on a fake scale they invented, they are almost never the ones who actually matter. Sometimes the brilliant person who sees your true value the most clearly is the absolute smallest person in the room. Sometimes your hero is just an 11-year-old boy wearing a cheap, stained suit, holding a cell phone full of dark secrets, carrying a brave heart full of something most adults have completely forgotten the name of. They viciously called me a pathetic single mom. My own mother labeled me a discount model. 250 people laughed at my pain, and my young son bravely walked right through every single one of them to declare what desperately needed to be said. "My name is Felicity Harrison. I am 35 years old. I am a talented graphic designer, a fiercely protective mother, and the proudest person who ever sat in the back corner." Table 14 was meant for the people they secretly wished hadn't come. Turns out, it had the absolute best view in the entire house. That is my complete story, and if it deeply resonated with your heart, I would absolutely love for you to share it with someone who desperately needs to hear it today. Now I have one final question for you. What would you personally name this beautiful chapter of my life? Type A for the wedding that never was, type B for table 14, or type C for the scratched label. Drop your honest answer in the comments below. Thank you for being here. Thank you for truly listening. And always remember, your label never defines you. Your brave choices do.